read through that passage. You probably recognize a very familiar passage when Paul and Silas were singing in the prison at midnight. And we see the title of the message this morning is Cry Out. Cry out. In our text verses, verse 28, this is but Paul cried with a loud voice, saying, "Do thyself no harm, for we are here." And that we see in this story, we see that, as we know, they're in Philippi, and the damsel starts following them around. And we see she followed them for many days, and how that as we read that Paul commanded the spirit to leave her. And that's where kind of their problems started here. And her masters were upset because they were going to lose their money. And they were beaten with stripes. They were cast in prison. You know, they weren't just locked up. They were put in the inner prison, and they had the shackles on their legs. But we see that at midnight they were praying and singing praises. And right there is kind of a difference between most of us and Paul and Silas right there. You know, here they were locked up, and yet they were still praising the Lord, singing praises. They were praising and not pouting. You know, that's probably what most of us would do. You know what? I'm not sure that wouldn't be me. You know, not the praising, the pouting part. You know, I probably, you know, it'd be real easy to be like, yeah, you know, we were serving God, and we were doing what the Holy Spirit led us to do, and now look where we're at. But you know what? That's not how they were. They were still praising the Lord. And then we see that there was an earthquake, and it must have been a pretty good sized one. Because the doors were open, and it loosed their bands. And then we see here how that we all know the story, how that the jailer was about ready to take his life. He figured, oh, everybody's escaped. I'm just going to kill myself. You know, I kind of cut out the middleman there, and and just take my own life. But like I said, that our text verse is that verse 28, which says, Paul cried with a loud voice. He cried out. And I couldn't help but think that, realize how that we as Christians nowadays, we need to cry out to those that need him. And let folks know about, while there's still time, let them know about the Lord. We see a few things about how Paul cried out. We see he cried out with a loud voice. He cried out with a loud voice. You know, he wanted to make sure that the message was heard. You know, you hear that, well, Paul cried out. Well, you might envision it one way, you know, how he did it. But I think if maybe we might all envision it a little different. But we all envision him using a loud voice. You know, you say, hey, don't worry. You know, you wouldn't say, well, that's not crying out. You say, hey, you know, and yelling. It's like I want everyone to hear. I want the jailer to hear that, you know, everyone's here. No one's left. He wanted to make the message heard. Here, the jailer was in a situation he thought it was hopeless. He thought, you know what? The doors are open. Their chains are loosed. Surely they're all gone. Surely my situation is hopeless. And Paul cried out with a loud voice because he wanted to let that jailer know, hey, your situation isn't hopeless. You know what? We see that the jailer, he was saved physically with his life. You know, his life was spared by Paul crying out, and he was saved spiritually by Paul sharing the gospel with him. Well, he wanted to make sure the message was heard, and he cried out. And he didn't care if others hurt him. You know, if you think about it, I know we focus on, the miracle of the earthquake and how the doors were open and their chains were loosed. But the fact is, there was probably everyone else in that jail probably wasn't real happy with Paul. You think, they're in prison for a different crime, whatever their crimes were, and here, middle of the night, the doors are open, their chains are off. It's, let's beat feet out of here. But here's Paul saying, hey, you know what? Don't worry, we're all here. Come on, And probably there are some there that didn't want to hear what Paul had to say. He's like, hey, hey, you two, be quiet, or you'll get another beating. But the thing, there's probably some that weren't real happy. They just as soon, get out of there. But he didn't care that they heard him. He saw that the prison guard was going to kill himself. And he's like, and he cried out with a loud voice before he killed himself. And you know what? There'll always be those that want us to remain quiet when we cry out, trying to warn people about what their impending doom. Telling them about Jesus and how that their situation isn't hopeless either. But and so there are those that are just fine with you being quiet, and they want you to be quiet. And you know what? Satan's one of those, one also that wants you to be quiet. We see that God was working in that prison that night. We see when God began to move, it says, the poem goes, though the middle of the night in a jail cell's dim light, still they sang with all their might when God began to move. Bound in shackles, no wrong done, save proclaiming Jesus, God's own Son. The jailer's house had to be won when God began to move. All at once the ground did shake. Then the jailer did awake. Up he sprang, and fear did quake when God began to move. All their bonds had fallen away. Gates were open, yet they'd stay. What must I do is what he'd say when God began to move. From sin's prison bars he'll free. Chains of despair he holds the key. He'll work a miracle, you'll see, when God begins to move. And the fact that God was working in that jail cell that night. And Paul cried out with a loud voice. He wanted to let the jailer know your situation isn't hopeless, and that he realized he needed to be saved. And he cried with a loud voice. But you see, not only that, he cried out with compassion. He cried out with compassion. He cared about that jailer's lost condition. He didn't want to see that jailer take his life. In Jude 22, and of some have compassion, making a difference. An idea that Paul cried out with compassion. He cared. Nowadays it's easy. It's all too easy to get focused on self, what we're going through, what the different situations we're in. That we tend to focus on self and not look around and have compassion on others. There are lost souls all around us. And if we had compassion, if we had compassion for them, we'd see that we need to cry out and let them know. Do we have compassion on folks? I mean, nowadays we don't have enough compassion to, if somebody tries to cut in traffic, we don't have compassion on them. And I have to say, sometimes I'm guilty of that too. My truck is like, where is the horn? You know, and they got all that airbag and padding. It's hard. You got to really, you got to be hitting that thing with purpose to get it to honk. He's like, but you know, I'm just being honest with you. And but the thing is, if we do we have compassion on folks? See, more and more, compassion is barely existent anymore. But do we have compassion? Do we see them as souls that are on their way to hell? I heard a story not long ago about a man that had I think it was a new boat, and he was driving it, and he hit he's going under a bridge, and he hit a pylon. And the people that were on the bridge, they were able to get him out of the water, and they were trying to help him, and the traffic started backing up. Well, and there, like I said, the folks that saw what happened, they were trying to help the fellow, the driver of the boat, and traffic was backing up, and there was people were watching, and didn't know maybe what was going on, and they're getting a little impatient. What's going on with the traffic? And then there's one fellow. He could kind of see what was going on, and he's like, there was an accident. I'm like, he just kind of sat there. And then he was wondering why, what's taking so long? Still kind of nonchalantly. Then he's like, you know what? I'm going to go up there and see what's going on. He wasn't too far back, so he walked up there, and come to find out, the man in the boat was his brother. But the fact that, once he saw that was his brother, he went from being nonchalant about it, but he cared about that person. He went from just a guy that was in an accident to his brother that he cared about needing help. How do we see those around us that need to be saved? Just as someone that's in a way, someone that's, whether it's an inconvenience, or is it, or do we see them as somebody that needs help? It needs the help that we have, that we can share with them. He cried out with compassion. We need to not have that, they used to say more often in churches, we four no more. It's just us. We don't need anyone, no one else. And but they think, well, that's kind of silly. But all those cliches are kind of have a little bit of basis there. I've been around where people look out and say, whose car is that? He's like, oh, I don't know them. They're a visitor. And then I've heard they say, why are they here? It's like, because they're visiting. And it's like, you know what? I think right there's the problem. We're so comfortable where we're at. We won't even have compassion on someone else to share the gospel with them, give them a tract, invite them to church. Paul cried out with compassion. In the fact that we need to have compassion on the lost condition of those around us, those in our community, and give to missions to help reach those around the world, help support our missionaries. But we need to make sure we're doing our part also. Not only did he cry out with compassion, he cried out in time. He cried out in time. As we read through that passage, I'm sure as you read through it, you think, well, that went along pretty quick. They had the singing, earthquake, doors open, the jailer's pulling out his sword. I don't know what time elapsed there, but I don't think it was a lot of time. He cried out in time. He realized the urgency. He realized that, he didn't have a lot of time to stop that jailer, to tell the jailer that, hey, you know what, your situation isn't hopeless. You see, in verse 27, he was about to take his life. In verse 28, Paul cried out. You know what? He didn't have to think about it. He didn't have to pray about it. He didn't, look around to see who was watching or what. He just, he didn't just take time to say, I wonder what these other prisoners are going to think if I call out to the jailer and keep him from killing himself. He cried out in time. You know what? We need to tell folks and tell them about Jesus while there's still time. You say, well, there's plenty of time. We don't know that. We need to not go around thinking, well, maybe later I'll tell maybe a coworker or a loved one. Or thinking that you'll have another chance. You may not have another chance. The Lord may come back. The Lord may take that person. That person might go out into eternity lost. Just because we're trying to think, well, should I do it? Is this the perfect time? Do I have all the words down right? No, we need to not think. We need to cry out in time. And don't be concerned about, what if somebody sees me? What if I go out on Saturday and somebody sees me knock on somebody's door? What if my coworker sees me, trying to invite someone to church? And man, it would be the worst if I happened to actually knock on a coworker's door. Oh man. You know what? We need to not worry about that. We need to tell them, we need to cry out and tell them while there's still time. And the fact that, like I said, you might not have another chance. You might not have that another opportunity. We need to cry out with a loud voice. Don't be afraid to tell others about him. We need to cry out with compassion. If we be concerned about their souls, be concerned to the fact that they're going to die and go to hell if somebody doesn't tell them about Christ. And we need to cry out in time. We need to not just, I'm going to find that perfect time. You'll never find that perfect time. Because you know why? You'll come up with an excuse every time. Every single time, you'll have an excuse. Count on it. You need to cry out in time before it's too late. We see from this passage a few things regarding Paul crying out that we can take and we can use as Christians while there's still time to reach those around us. We'll all say, well, you know what? I know that's important. I know that those around me, they need to be saved. But you know what? Then we need to get busy and do our part while there's still time. And we need to cry out.